Hey guys, welcome back to another Q&A on May 14th, 2023. I have several questions this week. I put up a thread and kind of forgot about the thread and accumulated some questions. So first one is, how would you increase BMR for a bodybuilder that used to be skinny fat? So BMR is basal metabolic rate. Largely your BMR is going to be based on genetics. Now, there are of course, a lot of small factors that can influence that in terms of hormone balance and supplementation and things of that nature. But unless you're dealing with some kind of suboptimal environment hormonally or metabolically, like you're compromised, your body is downregulated for some reason, right? So those adaptations that occur from chronic dieting and or yo-yo dieting and stress and all those things, unless you're dealing with that, your BMR isn't really something that you're going to be able to increase above its normal baseline unless you're kind of artificially doing that through supplementation or something, which probably isn't a very sustainable thing to do. If you were perhaps, in a fat loss phase and you were trying to increase BMR temporarily, then of course, supplementation may be something that you can do there. Generally, stimulants do increase BMR to a point, right? We can target different receptors. For example, we can target alpha receptor activity with yohimbine. We can, beta receptors through clenbuterol or even like ephedrine, caffeine, things like that. Synephrine. We can use non-stimulant ingredients. Morphoburn, for example, is a great non-stimulant product that would potentially help slow down some of those adaptations and target thyroid hormones as well. So that would be another way to increase BMR potentially, or exogenous thyroid, or making sure that you're refeeding or doing diet breaks or things like that could potentially help increase BMR during deficit phases. Like all of those things would help, but of course that's very situation specific. There's nothing you're going to do just sitting around in a maintenance phase is really going to serve much purpose trying to increase BMR. So hopefully that makes sense. Thinking about competing, when should you get a coach? For a build prior or just for the cut? That's a great question. I hope a lot of people hear this. So a couple things to consider. If you're only hiring the coach for the prep, at least give them a good 4 to 6 weeks prior. And I'm talking like minimal. And you're probably going to need a prep for longer than you think. So whatever you think you need a prep for, add about 8 weeks to that. And then add about another 4 to 8 weeks to that. And then you might have enough time. Because the coach needs to do an intake, learn this information, even just getting in a routine of you checking in and getting used to the system is something that isn't like automatic. Some people it is. I just started a prep with a client, or we're getting ready to start a prep, came in a little bit ahead of time, sent the information, didn't have any questions, good to go right out of the gate, sent the first check-in, didn't ask any questions, good, bam. That's not the norm, right? Some people can do that, some people cannot. Just keep in mind that, you're going to need to tack on quite a bit more time than what you think you probably need is the takeaway there. Now, in an ideal world, you would come in well prior to that and probably go through at least one surplus and deficit phase with the coach so they can kind of learn your body's tendencies prior. That would probably be ideal long term, right? And then we can see how you react in a surplus, how you react in a deficit, what changes elicited which effects, see blood work, see like all these things, and that would be ideal. But some people come in and they're just like, I'm going to prep, I'm 16 weeks out. Like, that's not what we want to deal with. That is a really, that's far from ideal for any prep. It can be done, definitely done it. It's not the best option, probably. Feeding up sedentary individuals with low cortisol. Can you using cardio, or is that counterproductive? I think that's what they're asking. So low cortisol, so adrenal insufficiency. In that state, your body's stressed just like it is with high cortisol. It's just that it's probably been there for a while, so it's now kind of falling off on the other end. So with that being said, the body's kind of in a pretty delicate situation here. So activity can still be done. It just needs to be pretty low impact, right? Keeping everything, not raising the heart rate to any extreme level, keeping CNS taxation down via training. So nothing close to failure, no HIIT cardio, no intervals. Some walking is probably fine, right? Low intensity walking is probably fine, as long as they're not doing 20,000 steps a day, right? They're probably going to be okay. But feeding them up is not going to be really any different than anyone else. It's just that they're not going to have much energy, right? One thing to consider is when you have these irregularities in cortisol, if it's low all the time, or if maybe you're just getting lows, hypoglycemia is an issue because the adrenals aren't really able to help signal to the liver and other tissues to help pump out these energy substrates during periods where you're not eating. Maybe not doing any fancy peri-workout or super intensive nutrient timing or anything, and just kind of keeping meals nice and even and keeping, blood sugar as stable as possible. Like, that's probably going to be a more ideal nutritional approach with that type of person, not going super high carb or super high fat or anything, kind of more even keel, distributing evenly throughout is probably going to be ideal for that type of situation as you feed them up. All right. Hormonal BC compared to copper IUD and the effects it plays throughout the body. That would be a long video, but we'll just do a real quick cliff notes on that. So hormonal BC is obviously hormonal birth control, generally pill or IUD. IUDs are often progestin based for the most part, your popular ones. Pills, the newer gen pills, are normally a low dose estrogen, some type of synthetic estrogen, and a progestin, not progesterone, a progestin. Copper IUDs are IUD copper. They're going to be pregnancy prevention with a non-hormonal method. Now, that sounds great, and generally they are well tolerated in, I would say, the majority of people. However, some people do have issues. If you have issues with IUDs in general, the insertion of that process, then you would have an issue with a copper IUD or hormonal as far as the pain, right? Or heavy periods. But you're deleting the hormonal aspect. Now, copper in and of itself, even though the literature says that it is well tolerated and copper toxicity is rare, of course, it's not impossible. It definitely happens. So mineral imbalances could be a potential issue with that. That would be something to look out for. With hormonal BC, there's a whole lot of things that can happen, right? The whole idea of a hormonal birth control is to basically tell the body that it's pregnant, right? So they're not releasing an egg, they're not ovulating. Now, over time, downregulation of endogenous hormones is going to occur, right? Because we don't really want them, right? We don't want that signaling. So, and no one's really on hormonal birth control for short periods of time. Generally, it's decades even, right? So over time, that fertility can become an issue if they're coming off and trying to rebound their hormones. Motility issues, so these progesterone and estrogen are affected. So and these hormones interact with our motility system and our GI tract, so that can be affected. So we see a lot of digestive issues, especially SIBO. A whole slew of issues, hormonal imbalances, across the board. Some people react to certain birth controls and even have an androgen increase, especially the IUDs seem to do that a little bit more, the progestins. So there can be a whole lot of issues that come along with that. That's not to say that no one can take a hormonal birth control and be successful, because they definitely can. I would say if comparing the two, the copper IUD is probably going to have less issues, and between the hormonal side, depending on the person's initial hormone profile and genetics, usually low dose pill form is going to be a little bit less invasive, but none of it's ideal. And that's kind of the whole takeaway. If weight loss is not stalling, but TSH is high at 4.5, do you recommend the introduction of T4? Okay, so you would want to look at the T4 and T3 levels. So TSH, right, is thyroid stimulating hormone. So essentially the feedback loop is detecting a certain amount of T3, which is our active thyroid hormone, and it's signaling back up to the top and saying like, hey, we need more TSH or less TSH depending on if we have enough active thyroid hormone. So what this is telling us, and this is a regular normal adaptation that occurs during a deficit, is that thyroid, especially thyroid conversion from T4 to T3, will slow down, right? That's the most common thyroid adaptation that's going on during this. So that TSH is essentially going to start increasing because we're not getting enough T3 because we're not converting enough T4 to T3. So if you added T4, potentially depending on the dose, you'd potentially get more T3, right? But if your conversion of T4 to T3 was already very poor, that may not be a very effective way because a lot of that T4 is still going to continue to convert to reverse T3 and be inactive. First, I would want to know like what is causing the hormone feedback loop to downregulate, and probably dieting in this case, right? But what is the downregulation? Is it a conversion issue? Is it a free hormone issue? Is your free T3 low? Are there gut issues? Is there inflammation? Like what is causing this, right? And then it would tell you, would you be a candidate for maybe fixing the underlying issue, maybe just refeeding, diet breaks, things like that could help with that hormone conversion. That's pretty well documented. Or would you need a combination medication of T4 and T3 on making sure you're having that T3 component? Because if the conversion sucks, then you're going to have a hard time unless you're just pounding down tons of T4. It's kind of a really, it's going to be kind of an ineffective way to get to your end point, I guess is what the point is there. How to prep someone with Hashimoto's. Boy. Okay, so Hashimoto is obviously an autoimmune thyroid disease and resulting in low thyroid hormone. So what's happening there is our immune system is essentially attacking our thyroid gland, right? So it's faulty. It's not producing enough of the thyroid hormone that we need. Now, the problem with that is we need to figure out why the immune system is reacting in this way. So if there are gut issues systemically, especially inflammatory issues, IBD, anything like that going on, women are generally more susceptible to this, then we would want to look at that first, because calorie balance is, you can still prep the person. And if they're on medication, you can still prep the person. It's just that this act of the deficit and stressing their body out through pushing them through prep is probably going to exacerbate this Hashimoto's that's already there. I would really want to get those antibodies down as low as possible prior to the prep to make sure that we don't already have one foot out the door. So that really is the answer to the question, is like you want to manage the Hashimoto's prior and learn that client before you even attempt to prep them. So I know maybe that's not the answer that you want. If your antibodies are already, TPO's 1,000 already, and then you're going into prep in that state, I mean, good luck. It's going to be rough. It's going to be a nightmare. How do you not allow the strict bodybuilding routine to get in the way of life with loved ones? That's a great question. I think the person asking this is kind of young too. This is something I think a lot of people that are newer to the lifestyle, it takes a while to learn. Their family members don't understand. Their friends don't understand. They don't really know how to integrate this into their normal lifestyle. So unless you're like going out and partying on weeknights or binge drinking on the weekends, it's really not all that difficult. You can still go out to eat and use macronutrient information from the restaurants, plan ahead, bring meals with you when you need to, do all these things. You don't have to like barricade yourself inside your house to bodybuild. Late stages in prep, obviously, if you're doing lots of cardio, it's a little more time consuming, but it really shouldn't interfere with your life a whole lot, right? You can still do everything. Bring a cooler. People make it harder than it needs to be. Yes, people won't always understand, but trust me, they'll get used to it. And if they don't, maybe they're not good friends in the first place. I've personally found that I have, people, acquaintances or friends, people that are not, been around a lot of people that aren't in the lifestyle, and no one really cares at the end of the day. You do it for a little bit, no one really cares, right? So don't make it harder than it needs to be. Plan ahead, use restaurant nutrition facts if you need to, bring food, do these things, go off plan when you can. Like just make sure that it's, make sure that it's not all the time, right? So I find that people just overcomplicate this process, and especially early on when they're just not really getting support. So are there strategies besides sleep hygiene when there's insomnia caused by stress? So sleep hygiene is going to be important, but keep in mind that your circadian rhythm is the entirety of your day. So just because your sleep hygiene's good, your wake routine and your daily routine also matter. Making sure that you are getting up and going to bed at similar times, making sure that you do have that good sleep hygiene, but making sure that you're not consuming stimulants too late and that you aren't training an hour before you go to bed, right? If your circadian rhythm's all over the place and your total stress is high all the time, you can have a really good sleep routine, but still not sleep well because you're still in this sympathetic state. So the entirety of your day is what really matters here. It's not just like slapping your blue light blockers on right before you go to bed. There's a little bit more to it than that, because I think that if you manage stress and you have a good sleep and wake routine, consistency in times, things of that nature, then it's not difficult to go to sleep because your body operates on that rhythm, and you're not going to have any problem, passing out when it's time to call it a day. Last one, I believe. How do you find the right coach when starting bodybuilding? That is a tough question to answer because there's a lot to consider there. I think that a few things, there are good coaching options. There are plenty of good coaching options, but I think that you should also work with someone that you jive with. I think that maybe from a personality standpoint, you can vet people that way if you're following social media or if you talk to them or whatever it may be. That might be something that is important to you rather than just like this coach has the formula to success. If you're a pretty cut and dry person, you follow directions, you don't really have a lot of questions and you're just pretty straightforward, probably doesn't make much difference. Personality and personability of the coach can make a difference toward your success. So I think that can be a factor that is really big for people, because you might clash a little bit if not. So understand, like, what do you need in a coach? And then that's going to help you determine, which coach that you choose. So I think another great thing to do, besides just talking to the coach, is if they have testimonials, like look at those things, or if they have other clients of theirs, talk to the clients. I always tell people I would much rather other people talk about me than me talk about myself. I think that their experience will speak louder than me just saying something about myself as a coach and why I might be a good option for you. So I think that maybe just speaking to a couple of their clients would be a great way to understand what you're getting into and what you're going to get out of that coaching experience. I think that's a really great way to kind of vet out the coach that you might be looking for. So, all right, guys. Yeah, great Q&A today. We got quite a few questions, so I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you next time.